Hello, now we're going to talk about the Gilded Age. Often it is skipped in a lot of history classes, but I think it's kind of important because I feel like in a lot of ways this is where modern America starts. And you have the Gilded Age that will make way for the Progressive Age, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks because for some reason imperialism is next. Um, but I think what we'll find is a lot of what we think of as modern America starts here. So let's get started. So this is a time where urbanization expands. More people are living in the cities. Um, in 1860, 1 in 5 Americans lived in cities. Now it's 2 in 5. In 1860, there were 9 cities with a population of over 100,000. In 1900, there are 38 cities with a population of over 100,000. New York had 3.4 million. Chicago, 2.7 million. That's why it's called the second city. Philadelphia, 1.3 million. 78 other cities had populations of 50,000 or more. Agriculture becomes more mechanizing, causing more mechanized, causing more people to come to the cities. More job opportunities existed in the cities. We also have the Great Migration, where many African Americans will move from the South to the northern cities. From 1890 to 1910, 300,000 African Americans will move. In Chicago, in 1890, the African American population was 15,000. By 1920, is 110,000. This is actually called the Great Migration that lasts from 1890 to 1970, where 7 million African Americans will move from the south to the north. However, most urban growth comes from immigration. Mostly from Europe, Southern and Eastern Europe. 28 million immigrants came from 1860 to 1920. Many chose to come here to escape hardships. An American Tale with Five of the Mouse does a good job of showing this. Mostly people come for economic opportunity. In 1890, immigrants and their children made up 78.6% of New York's population, 77.5% of Chicago's, 78.6% of Milwaukee's, the city of love, and San Francisco made up 68.3% immigrants and their children. 14.8% of our total population by 1910 were first or second generation Americans. We began to see ethnic enclaves like in cities like Little Italy, Little Africa, etc. Often groups will face hostility and discrimination. We also will begin to see smaller groups within the enclaves, like in Little Italy, you'll have Little Sicily. Cities were seen as an exciting place. Others saw them as overcrowded, filthy, and a place of despair. They were densely packed slums in some cases. New York's Lower East Side by 1890 had 334,000 people per square mile. Tenements held multiple families. If you ever saw old sitcoms based in big cities, you saw a tenement basically. These were apartments, usually 2 or 3 poorly ventilated rooms, no kitchen. High rates of death and disease and death were often in the cities. Drinking water often becomes contaminated, mostly by horses, believe it or not. Inadequate street cleaning led to an overall filthiness, which was bad for health. Unsanitary street vendors. This is street meat. You had to buy your food outside, cooked. The big problem was, it wasn't only food on those carts sometimes. It was other things, and you had cross-contamination. There were frequent epidemics. In 1891, Chicago had 2,000 deaths due to typhoid fever, 4,300 from bronchitis and pneumonia. Between 10,000 and 12,000 children died each year in this country. Demand for housing, however, continued to be high in cities. Rents were always rising. You might remember that guy that ran for mayor of New York. No matter what question he'd ask, black dude with the beard, he's like, the rent is too damn high. Well, it was. If you were a bricklayer, basically rent would cost you 28% of your income. If you were a cloak maker, 38%. That's something we should bring back. Evictions became pretty common. In New York, 16,000 evictions a year. in the early 1800s, 23,000 a year by 1892. Crime rates were also high. Some women turned to prostitution. Mobility and anonymity often played a part in these crimes. You actually didn't know your neighbors, since it's a lot easier to steal from someone you don't know. Immigrants were often accused of crimes. In cities, you had what was called boss rule and the rise of political machines, usually associated with the Democratic Party. Used to still see remnants of this in like Chicago. When Rahm Emanuel was elected, he was the first one not named Daley to be mayor in a really long time. They were powerful in most large cities because they mobilized large blocks of working class and immigrant voters, and they were cozy with the businessmen. Sometimes in large cities, you had machines that controlled smaller parts of the city. Tammany Hall ran all of New York under the awesomely named Boss Tweed and would eventually extend their power. They had the ability to reward their supporters with jobs. They gave supports to immigrants by denouncing nativism. They offered a lot of services, including handouts. They used no questions asked charity to gain support. They would even intimidate voters and stuff ballot boxes. And that was pretty common. There were several ways to kind of do this. One way was you had someone go early, get a ballot, take it out with him, fill it out, give it to the next person. They would turn in that ballot and bring a unwritten on ballot back to you as a receipt, and then you would give that ballot to the next person, and so on and so on. That was a way to make sure people voted the way you wanted to. They would also use tissue ballots, where you would go in and vote and you would throw in several ballots at one time. This was pretty common during the time. There was a county in Kentucky who had 170% voter turnout during this time, highest ever on record. So you have nativism during this time. It's a revival of nativism. We have it every time there's new immigrant groups. And it targeted the so-called new immigrants, who were seen as bearers of unwanted habits and diseases. Many people wanted to restrict immigration. Josiah Strong, a evangelical minister in 1885, wrote a book called Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present Crisis, where he warned against the immigration menace. It will be part of the reason we have the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1887. We have in 1887 also the formation of the American Protective Association, the APA, sounds like an old wrestling group, where they were concerned about Catholic immigrants. They wanted to limit immigration. They wanted limits on immigration. Too many people they felt were coming in. They had 500,000 members by 1893. Made up mostly of the middle class. Midwestern Protestants made up most of them. They have chapters of their group in most cities in the East. In 1890, Congress will make oversight of immigration a federal issue, and usually you just dealt with it on a state-by-state basis, depending on what harbor you were in. Immigration depots were set up in most major ports to weed out undesirables. Ellis Island opened in 1892, though many thought the system was too lenient. In 1894, the IRL, the Immigration Restriction League, wanted literacy tests for immigrants. Cleveland, Taft, and Wilson all vetoed that, but Congress overrode the veto in 1917. It became law, and part of law still today. Some thought limiting immigration would end problems in the cities. Others began to look for more solutions. In 1845, New York creates their first paid professional police force, for better or for worse. They also replaced their volunteer firefighters with new technologies and paid firefighters. They adopted tougher building codes, but they still dealt with frequent outbreaks of cholera and other diseases. We began to learn more about germ theory during this time, and cities began to establish boards of health. Water quality will be improved, and waste removal and street cleaning will become more regular. We also began to build urban parks. Central Park is the best example, though they took out a lot of poor housing for that. In the 1890s, people wanted to condemn tenements to build more parks, which kind of defeats the purpose. They also began to see the expansion of public education. In most places, you have compulsory education at the age of 14. In 1870, 6.9 million children were in school. By 1910, it's 17.8 million. Millions also attended parochial and Catholic schools. This was saw as a way of Americanizing immigrants and bringing them into it. Indoctrination is part of this, if we're being honest. In fact, one way to kind of Americanize immigrations was the Pledge of Allegiance. It was a contest in 1892 for the 400th anniversary of Columbus. It will be recited daily in school. Under God, by the way, won't be added until the 1950s because of the godless communists. It was a little bit different than it is today. Like today, we put our hands over the heart. Back when you originally did it, you would say, I pledge allegiance to the flag. You would, kind of this dude in the 1930s in Germany kind of ruined that for everybody. So we also during this time began to look at poverty differently. And, at first people thought, like Carnegie and others did, if you're poor, it's your own fault. But now we're thinking maybe there's some things that cause poverty that are kind of beyond our control. There's a photojournalist named Jacob A. Riis, Riis, and he was a reporter for the City Crime Beat. In 1887, he began taking photos. He's actually a good friend of Teddy Roosevelt when he was police commissioner. And he began showing those photos, and he put out a book called How the Other Half Lives, Strifes Among the Tenements of New York. He talked about prostitution and drunkenness, and, he really laid it bare, and he showed that, some people are in bad shape. Like one of his subjects was a woman who, was left alone with her kids. Her husband had died or disappeared or something, and it's very difficult for women to find work at the time. However, women will be very important in this desire to end poverty. College women, educated women will set up things called settlement houses. Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr will create what is called Hull House in Chicago in 1889. They were wealthy women. They went to college, and then they did what wealthy women did. They went on a grand tour of Europe. Well, in Italy, they found these settlement houses, which were basically designed to help the poor and the immigrants in the community learn basic skills and things like that. So they came back and they created one in Chicago. And they offered educational classes first in literature and art, and then practical subjects like cooking and sewing and hygiene and civics and English and vocational training. Really, you can think of it as kind of the predecessor to the community or technical college. They were also against child labor and wanted factory safety to be more along the forefront. This will lead to other settlement houses in other cities. We'll also have the beautification movement during this time, where we wanted large parks and public squares. In 1893, we'll see the Chicago World's Exposition, where there will be this beautiful architectural design for urban planning, 700 acres along Lake Michigan. It becomes a nightmare during that depression as squatters move into these fake houses. So what I want to get into now is lifestyles of the rich and famous and how our lifestyles actually change in this country. We have the emergence of mass transit, horse cars, steam railroads, and trolleys. We begin to see specialized districts like business districts in the cities, and we begin to see more and more people move to the suburbs. We see skyscrapers in high-value downtown areas because land is too expensive to expand out, so they begin to expand up. This thing is frozen. There it goes. Um, in 1885, the home insurance building in Chicago was the largest in the world. By 1900, Lower Manhattan had 12 buildings 300 feet or higher. The tops would often sway. There was a building, Grice Hall, at Western Kentucky University. It only has fourth floor, but on a windy day, if you're on that fourth floor, you will feel it sway. It gives you a feeling of what those buildings might have been like. Um, Many will move to the suburbs to form middle class, like minded communities. Middle class women often had more free time. Women were expected to remain in their house and create a moral and nurturing environment for their husbands and family. This is a time where more women will go to college. 20% of degrees in 1900 will go to women. It's like 52% now. And many will work for the rights of women's rights. We see a lot of middle class women, especially involved in women's clubs and charities, like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who wanted to get rid of alcohol. We'll talk about that more in the Perez era. We also have suffrage movements like the NAWSA, though it excluded black women, so it wasn't exactly all on the level, you know. The 1890s will see the emergence of the new woman who will pursue education and politics and often delay marriage. We will have a new distinct look for women, the Gibson girl look. This is also a time where more and more people will begin to ride bicycles. And in fact, for many, this will be seen as the decline of civilization. This is where the moral decline began. Here's a picture of the new woman and her bicycle. So why were bikes considered to be the decline of civilization? Well, it's because a young woman and a young man could actually get on a bicycle and get away from their chaperone, which could lead to, hand holding or kissing. And that's just you know, she acts like a hussy out there holding hands with a man. I'm kidding, of course. Please, no complaints. But, it really was seen as the end of civilization. That's a good spot to kind of end first video. Next video we'll start with leisure time.